This is Nick Osage for SOC 280 CI Section 3, Professor Brian Thomas. This is my presentation of my final paper, Making Something Out of Nothing. The item I chose to focus on was the 1928 Chevy Imperial Landau. This item has specific relevance to me because we have one. It's been in our family for years and we're currently restoring it. Just to give you some background information on this particular vehicle, it was made in 1928. The engine in it is a 4-cylinder that they started producing in 1913. It has 35 horsepower, which is unheard of for vehicles because vehicles nowadays have a minimum horsepower of like 125. So like it's not real fast, but it was state of the art in its day. It sold back then for between $475 and $715, which again unheard of because all our vehicles nowadays cost anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 and higher. Definitely the price difference because of inflation and basically the kind of technology we have in our vehicles nowadays. And it has a wood frame construction encased by steel, and that's the 1928 Chevy Imperial Landau. Okay. We're going to be analyzing this from Ritzer's perspective from his book, The Globalization of Nothing 2. We have something, he's defined something as a social form that is generally indigenously conceived, controlled, and comparatively rich in distinctive substantive context, which means that it has value to, and it's tied to a certain location, everything has certain value to somebody. Nothing is the complete opposite, or it's centrally conceived and controlled and comparatively devoid of distinctive substantive content. And then next we'll look at Ritzer's 5 dimensions that make up the continuum for nothing versus something. His complexity dimension, something would be, an item that is something would be one of a kind. Nothing, it would be like generalized and interchangeable. The 28 Chevy is definitely at the something end of the spectrum in this dimension because it is almost one of a kind. There's not very many of them left. This is because of the wooden frame. Most of them rotted into the ground by now. And it was produced by basically workers, so not everyone was exactly the same. They had to kind of modify parts for each one because the dimensions weren't exactly the same on each one because you have human error involved. Next is the spatial dimension. Something in this dimension would mean it has local geographic ties to one area, and nothing would mean that it has no ties. The 28 Chevy has specific geographic ties. Number one, because it was made by General Motors, which back then was only produced in Michigan. The actual wood carriage to this vehicle was produced in Grand Rapids, Michigan by the Grand Rapids Carriage Company, which has special meaning to me because I'm from the Grand Rapids area and everything, so it has a local tie there. We had to redo the carriage on the one we own, and it was actually redone by the same company, which was still in business at the time. It was in the heyday of Grand Rapids wood furniture production. There's many factories down there for that, so they produced wooden carriages for cars. And since it was mainly produced in Michigan, it has specific ties to the state of Michigan. The next dimension is temporal. Something would mean that it has tie to a specific time, whether it be a historical tie or you can just say, oh, it was from this time period. Nothing means it has no ties. You can't tell whether it's from any specific time in history. Obviously, the 1928 Chevy has a specific tie to 1928 since it was produced then, and some car enthusiasts can even tell by just the looks of the vehicle when it was produced, that it was produced in that specific year. The next dimension is the human dimension. The item that is something would mean that it has some human involvement. It's humanized. Nothing would mean no human involvement. It's dehumanized. The 1928 Chevy is obviously has human involvement. It was made on an assembly line where employees actually built these vehicles by hand. They had to make specific modifications so each vehicle would fit together because, like I said, that human error, so each vehicle wasn't the same. And the magical dimension, not many items have this. Something would be that it has an enchanted feel. Nothing would be as disenchanted. A good example of enchanted feel would be like Disneyland and everything. You feel the magic and everything. Many people don't have this feeling for the 1928 Chevy, but for my dad, for example, when he sees that vehicle, he ties it to a feeling like he's back in the Prohibition days and bootlegging liquor with these vehicles and everything. So in that sense, it has a magical feeling for some type of people. It can actually bring them back to that and remind them and make them feel like when they're driving it, like they could be like a bootlegger back in the 1920s. And the whole idea of making something out of nothing, each individual part on this vehicle was made from raw materials, which are in a sense nothing. They don't meet Richter's criteria for something on the spectrum. So therefore they took raw materials and everything, and it's basically the concept of this vehicle that makes it something, unlike vehicles we have nowadays. And the reason the vehicles we have nowadays don't fall into the something spectrum is because of globalization. And then globalization we define as